the city's 13th Summit on Race Relations and its first virtual summit. We're so glad you're here. Before we begin, I would like to thank pianist Carolyn Browning for the beautiful, lovely music we've heard as you join today's event. And today's event, which is going to be invigorating, insightful, and innovative, would not be possible without a phenomenal, magnificent team. And at this time, I'd like to introduce you to the team behind the program you are about to see. Please join me in thanking Tremaine Hughes, Poonam Bhatta, Andrea Griffin, Kathleen Wright, Samuel Watkins, Danny Colton, Toya Owens, James McKinney, Ada Dees, Mary Knight, and I am Angela Hendricks, the Chief Diversity Officer for the City of Tallahassee. At this time, I would like to ask you to please stand for the presentation of colors by James S. Rickards, Jr. ROTC, followed by the national anthem.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please stand as the James S. Rickards, JROTC Color Guard presents the colors as we honor our great nation with the singing of the national anthem by Cadet Ransom.
Color, salute.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
James S. Rickards, Jr. ROTC, and Cadet Ransom for that great presentation of colors and the singing of the national anthem. At this time, we will now have our invocation. Please join me in welcoming Imam Rashad Mujahid, Pastor Derek McGee Sr., and Rabbi Michael Shields.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. With God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. All together. The Quran tells us, Almighty God Allah says that He's created us from one soul, one human family, one soul, solidifying our common connection as one human family. The Quran further says that we are all the sons and daughters of Adam, which again connects us in this altogether theme that we are one human family. But to further solidify it and to bring it home, the Quran teaches us that this, O mankind, we have created you from a single male and a female, and made you countless nations and tribes and families, spread you out throughout the creation, not that you would learn to despise one another, but that you would learn to love and share and come together. The term is Later Arafu in the Quran, means to come together, to know each other, to come together. And in the sight of God, it says, the most honored among you are those who are most dutiful to God, who keep their commandments, to love one another, to cherish one another, to look after the poor. These are your duties to God. So we have to share in this life. We have to share this earth that God has put us together on. We have to share this earth, our home, our common shared freedom space. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Good morning. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth. Father, your scripture declares that how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And this morning we have come together, all together, as one. We've come for a single topic, single subject, which is diversity. That we are different by way of skin tone, but one by way of creation. And we thank you that today we enjoy your bountiful blessings and the miracles of life. We thank you for the privilege to be able to be in your image and in your likeness. Thank you for the privilege to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. We thank you because when we rested last night, you never slept nor slumbered, and we can reside in that. Thank you for the peace that we have in knowing that you are sovereign and you are supreme. We worship and adore you. We thank you that unity is required of us. I thank you that we have a heart for justice, a heart that we as a people can walk upright in righteousness. And although be diverse in different ways of thinking and different religious beliefs, we are one in that we are a people, a human being, a people who care about one another. Today, we pray that you will continue to lead, guide, order, and direct our very steps. We appreciate you and we thank you. We thank you that I believe and have the right to believe in Christ the Savior, and it does not disrespect what somebody else believes. And so, Father, we thank you that we've come together united, all together as one. I seal this prayer in the name that I believe has all power, the name of Christ Jesus our Lord. We thank you now. Amen. Shalom.
God of holiness, we hear your message. Justice, justice shall you pursue. God of freedom, we hear your charge. Proclaim liberty throughout the land. Inspire us through your teaching and commandments to love and uphold all that we hold precious. Let every citizen take responsibility for the rights and freedoms we cherish. Let all citizens recognize the privilege they have that they did not earn. Let each of us be an advocate for justice, an activist for liberty, a defender of dignity, and let us champion the values that make our nation a haven for the persecuted, a beacon of hope among the nations. May our actions reflect compassion for all people within our borders and abroad. May our leaders and officials embody the vision of our founders to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We pray for courage and conscience as we aim to support our country and our city's highest values and aspirations, the hard-won rights that define us as people, the responsibilities that they entail. We pray for all who serve our city, our county with selfless devotion. We pray for all those who serve in government, but also those who serve in grassroots movements, calling for justice from the trenches of righteousness, all those whose noble deeds benefit all of us. We are grateful. We pray for wisdom and moral strength, that we may be guardians of these rights for ourselves and for the sake of all people now and forever. It says in Hebrew, may we, brother and sister, all of us, he, she, they, all gather together in unity, in diversity, pursuing things that are holy. Amen.
Thank you again, Imam Rashad Mujahid, Pastor Derek McGee Sr., and Rabbi Michael Shields for those inspirational words that will start us off on this inspirational day. Everything we do at the City of Tallahassee is done with one vision in mind: to create a community that values and appreciates every citizen that we serve. That would not be possible without the leadership of this great organization. And we could not do any of this without the support of this organization, our city leadership, as well as our city commission. And to all of you, we say thank you for all that you do to provide a safe and productive environment in which we thrive. At this time, I'd like to ask you to please join me in welcoming our city manager, Reese Gold, to the podium. Mr. Manager.
I just unmuted you.
Okay, thank you. Let me begin again. Angela, thank you for the introduction. I think we've got a great summit today. And again, my name is Reese Gold. I am the city manager, and I'm so pleased to join you today. To my colleagues, I'm glad to see you here. And to everyone that's taken time to be part of this summit, thank you. I know it will be a great day. As we all know, COVID-19, the pandemic, has required all of us to adapt to new ways of doing things. We have embraced this challenge brought by the pandemic and turned it into a positive. And with this virtual format, we can reach many more individuals in our community and beyond. While we cannot fellowship together in person, which we all wish we could, we are all together in spirit via this virtual platform to share the importance of diversity and race relations in our community. In fact, we have presenters and participants joining us from all over the country, not just Tallahassee today. And now more than ever, we are so excited to be able to share this event with so many, to be able to hopefully spark productive discussions about race relations. This year marks the 13th convening of the Summit on Race Relations. Over the course of its history, this event has provided over 200 informative and educational workshops. But it has been a few years since our last summit, which was in 2015. This year, we feel it is especially important to facilitate open, honest, and safe dialogue about the many facets of race relations. Today's 23 presenters and panelists will discuss topics ranging from housing, education, healthcare, mental health, white privilege, and the role of law enforcement in our community. Our purpose today is to come away from this summit with a better understanding of race relations and, more importantly, of each other. It's our hope that these sessions will foster open dialogue and provide us with action steps that can be implemented to further break down racial, cultural, economic, and other social barriers that impact our home, Tallahassee. I'd like to take a moment to thank Angela and her team, the entire Office of Diversity and Inclusion, for their work in coordinating this event. It is months in the making, and I'm glad today is here. I'd also like to thank in advance our presenters and panelists for sharing their time and life experiences with us today. We are fortunate to have the very best speakers in this field to listen to, and we're eager to hear what you have to share. Finally, I'd like to thank our moderators, which are our cohorts in the city's new Public Servant Initiative program, as well as our T&I staff. They have their work cut out for them to make sure that this event runs smoothly. All of you have played an important role, and I thank you for what you have done. But none of this would be possible without the leadership of the mayor and the city commissioners. I know Mayor John Daly, our Mayor Pro Tem, Diane Williams-Cox, Commissioners Richardson, Matt Lowe, and Bryant have worked tirelessly to support these initiatives and work to bring us together. And that's not easily done. I'd like to thank each of them for their leadership and commitment to diversity and inclusion. So at this time, I'd like each of them to share a few words about today's event. We are joined by them, and I would like to begin by welcoming our mayor, John Daly, to share his thoughts about this event. So at this time, please welcome Mayor John Daly.
Thank you, Reese. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. I want to welcome everybody this morning to our first virtual Race Relations Summit, Tallahassee All Together. Today, we're going to be celebrating our diversity while at the same time recognizing that together we form one absolutely amazing community. Reese, I want to thank you for opening up the virtual summit today, and I especially want to thank Angela and her team for all the hard work they've done putting this summit together, and I know today is going to be wonderful and an incredible success. I also want to reach out and thank the faith-based leaders that opened us with invocation this morning, and of course the Rickards High School Junior ROTC for the presentation of colors in our national anthem. We have so much to be proud of in this community. You know, what started as an idea for fostering open and honest dialogue about race in 1997 actually grew into the first city Race Relations Summit in 2000. And since then, the city, like I said, oh, my dog is very active this morning. Sorry, folks. But as we know, we've had 12 summits, and they've all been very successful, and this is our 13th. But no doubt 2020 has been a very difficult year. Virtual meetings with dogs in the background and all the other things that we've had to face. But more importantly, the issues that we've had to face as a community, as a state, as a nation, makes this summit that much more important. It makes the conversations about who we are and how we can learn from each other and how we can move forward together as a community that much more important. Today's event is an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other, but more importantly, how can we continue to work together to bring positive change and growth within our community and reinforce and enhance racial equity for everyone? Today, I would like to thank each of you for your willingness to participate, to be a part of this positive change. And I also want to express my own commitment, both personally, also as the mayor, and on behalf of the City Commission of Tallahassee, to racial equity and to consistently strive and to make our great city better together. I want to thank the presenters. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our moderators. We have so many incredible individuals that put a lot of time and energy into making this a huge success. I hope each and every one of you enjoys today. Thank you for joining us, and I can't wait for the summit. Thank you, Reese.
Thank you, Mayor Daly. At this time, let's now recognize Commissioner Curtis Richardson for comments.
Good morning. Thank you, Reese, our city manager. Thank you for the leadership that you have provided in bringing us this Race Relations Summit virtually and meeting the challenges of being able to come together in this virtual platform. I want to thank Angela and her team for the work that they have done to make this happen and inviting all of the experts that we have in race relations to be a part of this year's event. Almost 20 years ago, we started this event as an in-person event, and it has benefited our community, this great city of Tallahassee that has twice been designated an All-America city. This year's event, 2020, and race is still an issue. Tallahassee all together. And that's what we're all about. We know that this nation was founded on issues of race. And all these decades later, centuries later, race still continues to be an issue in our nation. I grew up in a segregated society where there was very little interaction among the races, no dialogue. And we know that we have made considerable progress since then. and there is much more work to be done in this regard. And that's why I'm so proud of what we're doing here in the city of Tallahassee. And I hope we can continue to be a model for cities across this nation in terms of our efforts to bridge the racial divide, especially in times like now when there is so much racial strife in our country, and unfortunately incited by some of our leaders. But we have to make sure that we say to our residents, to those throughout the state of Florida and throughout this nation, that we're committed to bridging that racial divide and making the future better for our posterity, our children, our grandchildren. And so I think this is a very positive step in the right direction. I'm proud of our city and all that we are doing in that regard, and hope that we will continue so that my young daughters will grow up in a society and participate in society where race no longer is an issue. We see each other simply as individuals, as Americans, as Floridians, as Tallahasseans. And that's our goal with this tremendous event today. Again, I want to thank the staff for all of the work that they've done. I want to thank our technical staff because without them, this couldn't be possible. We may run into some hiccups during the course of the day, but we're certainly committed to making this event be the best that it can be. I want to welcome all of those who are participating with us virtually from throughout the nation. Welcome to our wonderful city of Tallahassee, and look forward to today's discussion and how we can be able to implement what we've learned in our city. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Commissioner Richardson. We appreciate those good words. We will now hear from Commissioner Jeremy Matlow. Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager, and good morning. And thank you for the entire commission attending today. I'm looking forward to a good event. We have some great speakers. I think we can all learn a lot and share a lot and really grow as a community. It's been an honor to serve on this city commission over the last couple of years and push for better policies within our city government, the creation of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and just the steps we made with our workforce and some of our procurements. I would be remiss as we have this conversation to bring up some missed opportunities I do think we had this year. During the Black Lives Matter protests, we saw 19 peaceful protesters arrested. They were met with hundreds of riot gear-clad law enforcement officers, and I think as we go through the conversations today, it's important that we be introspective and see if when communities across the country are really trying to bring people together, if that was an effective way of doing that. So I'd also use this opportunity to encourage our State Attorney, Jack Campbell, to drop all charges against those protesters. But I'm looking forward to a good summit, addressing our own biases, but as well as learning from others, learning what other people have to share and how we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Matlow. We will now hear from Commissioner Elaine Bryant. Commissioner Bryant, you're on mute. I think you can unmute yourself.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Good morning. Excited to be with everyone this morning. I have been listening, and let me first join the mayor, the city manager, and my fellow commissioners in saying that this is an awesome day for all of us as first the citizens of Tallahassee and for those who have joined us from other parts of the country. Let me thank, as we all have, Angela Hendricks and her staff for doing an awesome job to put together this type of race relations summit. It's not an easy task, especially in the environment that we're living in right now. But she started off by giving a few adjectives about how today she expected it to be. And she used the word invigorating. And I'm invigorated already. And I hope you're joining me in a similar way. Insightful, and I add educational, inspirational. We are looking forward to great information that will be shared by our various presenters. Let me thank all of them for sharing with us today. I am especially interested in some of the topics that have, in my mind, been on the forefront since I was at an early age and had to experience some of the things that we still talk about today. But I am, and hopefully you will be, and embrace with all of us, Tallahassee together, all together. And when you realize all is in the word Tallahassee, that helps us even more so embrace the fact that we must come together as one. So let me say that I am appreciating and celebrating our differences. I hope you are too, because that will bring us to a better Tallahassee, a better state of Florida, and a better nation. Thank you and good morning, and we look forward to a great day. Thank you, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Commissioner Bryant. I appreciate those words. I think we all share that sentiment. And before I move to Mayor Pro Tem Diane Williams-Cox for her comments, in introduction of our keynote speaker this morning, I'd like to take a moment for a point of personal privilege and ask the Deputy City Manager, my friend, Cynthia Barber, to share a few words, because without her and the passion that she brings every day, the passion that she places upon us that makes us all better, we frankly wouldn't be here today. She's a true leader, and I'd like at this time to ask Cynthia to share a few words.
Good morning, Reese, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for that. I have had the good fortune of participating in all of the Race Relations Summits. That could speak to how many birthdays I've had as well. But I'm extremely pleased to be here today, and I add my thanks on to Angela and her team. I believe that the diversity of our community is one of the greatest strengths that we have. And we know in the city of Tallahassee, on our quest to be the national leader in public service, we know we must build an organization that reflects the community that we serve. Our citizens need to be able to look at our organization and interact with our organization and see themselves represented. We are making great strides in that regard, and I'm extremely proud of it. With the city manager and the commission's support to establish the Department of Diversity and Inclusion, the fact that we have a leadership team with 10 African Americans who serve in the highest positions in the government, where I remember being one of 2 African Americans on the leadership team at one time. Also, the fact that we have 50% of the highest ranking positions in our police department that are African Americans. That's a police department where my dad served as one of the first, among the first African Americans to serve under a totally different kind of climate and environment. And to think today that I oversee the police department where my dad started, it just speaks to the progress that we made, but we also know that there's a lot of work for us to do. And these types of conversations and opportunities get us a lot of progress in that regard. So I'm really looking forward to this opportunity today. And we couldn't speak any more about the fact that this is a priority for us. This is another example of that, and I'm looking forward to participating today.
Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate those words. Now, at this time, I would like to recognize Mayor Pro Tem Diane Williams-Cox, who is a great champion for diversity and inclusion, and who has led the charge to renew this Race Relations Summit this year in 2020. I would like to personally thank her for her leadership and dedication, and frankly, her push every single day to encourage us to think bigger, be better, and lead with a servant's heart. We all appreciate what she does. At this time, please join me in welcoming Mayor Pro Tem Diane Williams-Cox for her comments, and who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning, and thank you, Reese, for those kind of words. I hate to keep saying this because this has been an emotional week We've had some we had a dedication to the first African American female mayor this week, and it has caused us to pause and think and see how far we have come. And here we are today continuing to work on our race. Yes, it is 2020, and race is still an issue. I want to thank, as everyone else has before me, I want to thank all of you, every one of you, all the way from the mayor, all the way down to our frontline workers, our janitors, the people who keep us safe and keep our building and facilities clean. I want to thank everyone, because it takes all of us to run the city of Tallahassee. And yes, I do see the progress. When I came to the city 2 years ago, I had a stern but yet direct conversation with our city manager. He's very kind in his words, but he understood what I meant when I said what I said to him, and he has shown me that he too is committed. We have our deputy city manager. That was one of the things on the pick list. You just heard from her. And we also have the individuals in leadership, as she mentioned, that came as a result of some of those conversations. We are very serious here in Tallahassee about moving our city forward, and we need to move forward together. And that means it's going to take all of us. And so I am just pleased and proud that we have all come together. Are we perfect? No, we are not. If we were perfect, we would not need to be having these summits. But we are striving. We're striving to come together, to be all together, and to move forward together. Have we made some missteps and some mistakes? Yes, we have. Will we make more? Yes, we will. But as in any family, when mistakes are made, you fix those mistakes and you move forward. You don't keep rubbing your faces in it. You learn from it, you do better, and you move forward. And when we make mistakes in the future, that's how we resolve it. We don't continue to point fingers. We continue to join hands and walk together in unity. And today's summit is an effort to reconnect. As the city manager said, it's been since 2015 since we've done this. So it's 2020. It's time. We see what's happening across our country. We see what's happening in the nation. We see the great divide. But we're not going to allow that to happen here in the city of Tallahassee. We're going to face our problems right up front. We're going to deal with them, and we're going to have resolve and resolution. What that looks like, I don't know. We the people will determine that, because we the people are the ones who will be in this all together. So I want to say, again, good morning, and thank you to everyone. I am so excited about this summit. I've had the opportunity to work directly with the staff and to help shape this and form this, and I am so pleased at how it has come out. The speakers are just bar none, and I'm just so happy and so pleased with what we've done. Angela, Kendrick, and your staff, I would put our diversity and inclusion team up against anybody in this country, because what you've done in pulling together this virtual summit is what many cannot do in a face-to-face summit. And I want to also thank the technology team, because, you know, my background is technology. So I know what you're doing back there. I've provided support for conferences, and, you know, you don't get to see the conference because you're back there keeping everything running. So just know that I know what you're doing. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and bring knowledge to you about our first speaker. I am, as I've said, I am so excited to get this thing started, and not a better person could we have found to jumpstart this. Tim Wise is our first speaker, and he's our keynote speaker, and he's among the most prominent anti-racist writers and educators in the United States. I'm sure many of you followed him, or you can see him on YouTube. He has spent the past 25 years speaking to audiences in all 50 states on over 1,500 college and high school campuses, at hundreds of professional and academic conferences, and to community groups across this country. He has also trained corporate, government, entertainment, media, law enforcement, military, and medical industry professionals on methods for dismantling racial inequality. in their institutions. WISE has provided anti-racism training to educators and administrators nationwide and internationally in Canada and Bermuda. WISE is the author of 9 books, including his forthcoming, one in the wings on its way, Dispatches from the Race War, December 2020 from City Lights book. So y'all look for it. It's coming soon. Other books include Under the Affluence, Dear White America, Letter to a New Minority, and Colorblind, all from City Lights books. His highly acclaimed memoir, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son, Racial Preference in Black and White, Speaking Treason Fluently, Anti-Racist Reflections from an Angry White Male, and Between Barack and a Hard Place, Racism and White Denial in the Age of Obama. Named one of 25 visionaries who are changing your world by Ultra Reader, WISE has contributed chapters or essays to over 25 additional books, and his writings are taught in colleges and universities across this country. His essays have appeared on Alternate, Salon, Huffington Post, Counterpunch, The Root, Black Commentator, BT Nation, and Z Magazine, among other popular professional and scholarly journals. From 1999 to 2003, WISE was an advisor to the 5th University Race Relations Institute in Nashville. And for those of you who are not familiar with 5th University, it is an HBCU. And in the early 90s, he was youth coordinator and associate director of the Louisiana Coalition Against Racism and Nazism, the largest of the many groups organized for the purpose of defeating neo-Nazi political candidate David Duke. WISE has been featured in several documentaries, including 2 from the Media Education Foundation, White Like Me, Race, Racism, and White Privilege in America, which he co-wrote and co-produced, has now been called a phenomenal educational tool in the struggle against racism, and one of the best films made on the unfinished quest for racial justice by Eduardo Bonilla Silva of Duke University and Robert Jensen of the University of Texas, respectively. The Great White Hoax, Donald Trump, and the Politics of Race and Class in America features WISE explores how American political leaders of both parties have been tapping into white anxiety, stroking white grievance, and scapegoating people of color for decades to provide and conquer working class voters and shore up political support. Hello, somebody. WISE also appears alongside legendary scholar and activist, my girl, Angela Davis, in the 2011 documentary, Vocabulary of Change. In this public dialogue between the two activists, Davis and WISE discuss the connections between issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, and militarism, as well as intergenerational movement building and the prospects of social change. More recently, he appeared in Chelsea Handler's Netflix documentary, Hello, Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea, on white privilege and racism in the United States. WISE appears regularly on CNN and MSNBC to discuss race issues and was featured in a 2007 segment on 2020. He graduated from Tulane University in 1990 and received anti-racism training from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond in New Orleans. He is also the host of the podcast Speak Out with Tim Wise. Now, if listening to all of that, if you don't believe that this guy knows what he's talking about, then I don't know where you've been. But I think his first words will let you know we have chosen the right keynote speaker for this moment in time. Tim, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for being with us this morning, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, first I want to apologize for the obnoxiously long bio that you just had to listen to, which it's like I was applying for a job, and I'm not. But if I was applying, I hope I got it. And I hope that by the time I'm done, you haven't fired me, because I do have some things to say, and we'll see how it goes. I want to offer a disclaimer first. I am a 52-year-old man with very little technological prowess and skill, which means there's every possibility that I'm going to knock the computer off of the thing it's sitting on. I'm going to disconnect my internet. I'm going to do something that's going to, mess this up somehow. I will be to blame for that almost inevitably. I have the link. I will get back on with you. I just have to say that, because if I don't, I'll have a technological glitch and I will lose connectivity, and I don't want you all thinking that I ditched you. I definitely have nowhere else I would rather be this morning, although it is very early where I am. I am in Nashville, so it's an hour earlier, I guess, than where you are. And so I just rolled out of bed. I probably look like I just rolled out of bed, but, I've been thinking about this presentation for a minute, so I think I'm ready to go. I want to thank the people who organized the event and invited me to be part of it. I also want to offer a very special thanks to the community activists and organizers who were not a part, interestingly enough, of organizing the event, for reaching out to me and letting me know some things that they felt that I needed to know, some of which I knew, some of which I didn't know, and which will certainly find its way into my remarks this morning. I think it speaks well of your community that you have so many people there in Tallahassee who wanted to reach out and wanted to let those of us who were presenting, who are maybe not locals, know some of the context behind the scenes of both this summit and the larger issue of race and racism in Tallahassee. I think it speaks well to the prospects for social change in your community, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Let me start off by saying that I think the language that we use when we talk about these issues and the way that we frame these issues is very important. And in the 30 years that I have been doing this work, and in the 25 of those that I have been doing this work around the country, speaking to events very much like this, speaking to schools, speaking to community organizations, et cetera. One of the things that I've noticed is that oftentimes we, and I put myself in this because I've been guilty of it as well, so it's not a critique of others, it is a critique of all of us who do this work. We sometimes have a tendency to use certain language that I think if we really think deeply about it, we can see minimizes the scope of the problem, right? And so when you come to events like this, you'll hear a lot of words thrown around. You'll hear words like unity, and you'll hear words like healing. And I know that those words are present in the program for this event, as they are at every event, including events that I have helped to plan. So once again, it is not a critique of others. It is a critique of all of us. But I think it is important for us to remember a few things about the language, right? That unity is a very lovely term. It's a very lovely aspirational ideal, but it is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve unity unless we are very, very clear about the forces that create disunity. That is to say, we cannot have unity without justice. We cannot have unity without real equity. And so sometimes when we use that term, absent that broader context, I don't think we do ourselves any favors. The same is true with healing, right? Healing is a lovely thing. Healing is what doctors do to the sick and what nurses do to the injured and ill, right? But healing is one piece of it. The problem being that if all we're doing is healing injury, but we're not stopping injury, then I'm not sure exactly what it is we're actually aiming at, right? In other words, if you're healing me from the last punch in the face that I just received, but someone else is continuing to punch me in the face, then we continue to have a problem. If you heal me from the last wound that I received, but someone continues to rip the scab off of that wound, your healing is not going to be sufficient. And so we have to stop injury, and that's a much different thing. And I just think it's important that we remember that. I also think sometimes we frame these issues, and this summit, like so many, is an example of it. And I have been, again, involved in these and planned some of these that use the same language. When we say things like race is still an issue, right? Well, race actually is not an issue. Race is not even a real thing. Race is an idea that was created by people of European descent, whom we now call white, so as to justify the plunder of black and brown labor and black and brown land. Let's be very clear. Race is a made-up thing that was specifically created for the purpose of theft, right? So the issue is not race, not in 2020, not in 1619. The issue is racism, and sometimes we avoid that language. or we frame it as race relations. I used to be on the advisory board, as you heard, of the Race Relations Institute at Fisk. Now, one of the things that we were very clear about, in spite of that being the name, and it was a name that harkened back to the 1940s when it had been created at that institution. But one of the things that we were very clear about, and I always want to make sure we all are clear about it when we use the framing of race relations, is that that framing too can get us in trouble, right? Because it sort of boils the issue down to interpersonal conflict, right? It boils the issue down to bad people being mean to other people. How can we improve relations and relationships? Very important, by the way, not trying to mock the idea, but once again, that isn't quite the same as addressing racism, which as an ism by definition is systemic. Right? Isms generally are capitalism, socialism, communism, fascism, authoritarianism. When we talk about isms, we generally mean systems. When we talk about relations, we're talking about interpersonal. We cannot fix the interpersonal if we do not address the systemic. And so I just want us, as we move through, to think about the way that we use language, and perhaps language that we could use which would be more direct, which would not be the indirect and what I guess, grammarians call the passive voice, right? We need to use the active voice. We need to be very clear about the things that brought us to this place if we hope to get out of them, because the language we use and the framing that we use will determine the strategies that we employ and the way in which we go about trying to get free, right? And if that's the goal, then we have to be on the same page at least as much as possible, right? So I want us to talk about that. I want us to talk about what it means to think systemically, because so often we don't, right? We look at racism and we think, well, that's those boys in Charlottesville back in 2017, right? Marching around the University of Virginia with tiki torches, shouting English language versions of German Nazi slogans from World War II. And we say, those are the problem. Those are the bad guys. I'm not like them. I don't know anyone like them. Therefore, I'm not embedded in the problem. Or we look for other examples of overt bias, which, you can find them, right? I mean, you can get on YouTube all day and you can find viral video after viral video of white folks behaving very badly at the Starbucks, at the Walmart, at the Target, yelling at people for, speaking a language other than English, yelling at people simply for being black, calling police on a black man in Central Park like Amy Cooper did earlier this year, right? Just sitting there bird watching. She's walking her dog. He says, in keeping with the park policy, in that part of the park, could you please leash your dog? She threatens to call the police. Let's remember, though, something about that incident. The problem wasn't just Amy Cooper, right? When Amy Cooper called the police on Christian Cooper, no relation, right? When Amy Cooper did that, it wasn't just her act of individual bias. It was embedded in her realization of the history of policing in America and why that call could, in fact, lead to something quite tragic for Christian Cooper. In other words, she didn't just express her own racism, she embedded her own racism in a larger context of systemic racism. She didn't call just anybody. She didn't phone a friend, right? At least not in the direct sense. She called the police and said that a black man was threatening her because she understood the history of systemic injustice against black people in this country. Right. She had an understanding of that was so deep that she knew exactly who to call on her phone, even in a moment when she seemed so flustered and so upset. She never forgot how to call 911 and what to say to the dispatcher when she reached them. Right. So the real issue is, how do we deal with the systemic piece? How do we understand the bigger picture? What is the bigger picture? Well, the bigger picture is this, among other things. Obviously, we could spend all day, we could spend all month going through the history of it, but let me just talk about a few things. The bigger picture is that we have 225,000 people in this country right now who are dead as a result of COVID-19, a disproportionate number of those black folks, indigenous folks, and Latinx folks, whose mortality rate from this particular pandemic is approximately 2.5 times the mortality rate of white folks. And I do not believe it is a coincidence that we have had such a nonchalant response to this virus in the state of Florida, here in the state of Tennessee, and frankly all around the country in so many places. I don't think it is a coincidence that that nonchalance sits side by side with disproportionate black and brown death. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is this. I think it is almost axiomatic, that is to say, almost inarguable, that if this pandemic had disproportionately been killing white people, disproportionately been killing wealthier people, disproportionately been killing younger people as opposed to older, and disproportionately killing relatively healthy as opposed to people with pre-existing conditions, our response would have been entirely different. I think if it had been disproportionately affecting the more dominant, more favored groups in our society, we would have shut everything down and nobody'd be going to the state capitol with camo and semi-automatic weapons demanding the reopening of everything. I don't think anyone would be complaining about wearing a mask at the Costco and claiming that it was tyranny to have to stand 6 feet from somebody at a Trader Joe's. I think if this pandemic were disproportionately affecting white folks, especially those with money, and who were relatively healthy and younger, we would have shut everything down. And the same people demanding a reopening who say, well, we got to get back to life as usual, would be demanding that the government just start printing money and sending checks out, right? Until we got on the other side of this thing. But because the disproportionate impact was against black and brown folks, racism says, doesn't really matter as much, right? Because it was disproportionately affecting working class and lower income folks, including lower income white folks, classism said, really doesn't matter that much. Because it was disproportionately affecting and is older folks as opposed to younger folks in the prime of their lives, so to speak, ageism said, well, you know, everybody dies, right? I mean, they're 80. Come on, what do you want? Right? Love grandma, but really, right? And because it was disproportionately affecting people with pre-existing conditions, ableism and a general sort of disregard for illness or blaming people who were sick for their illness, which we do all the time in this country, said, you got to let some people go, right? The rest of us have to get back to work. See, that mentality of human disposability, that mentality of hierarchy that says some lives are more valuable than others is why we're in the position that we're in right now, which is why when folks say all lives matter as some weak-ass retort to Black Lives Matter, you know they don't mean it because they don't mean all, they don't mean any. If they meant all, they wouldn't be letting old folks die. They wouldn't be letting sick folks die. They wouldn't be letting black and brown folks die and working class people die disproportionately from a pandemic that every expert, every scientist, everyone who believes in science knows we could have shut down at the inception, right? That's what the bigger systemic problem is. And the irony, right, is that once you indulge that mentality of human disposability, which we started doing 400 years ago on this land, right? Once you endorse that mentality that some lives are worth less than others, you might think that it's only going to apply to those folks over there, but eventually that mentality seeps out of the container you tried to keep it in, and now it's your grandma dying, and it's your immunosuppressed child who is at risk, and it's your diabetic spouse who is at risk. And so now we got a lot of white folks who were starting to understand perhaps how these chickens come home to roost, right? When you decide that there's a hierarchy of human value, don't be surprised when that mentality comes back to bite the whole country on the ass. That's where we are right now. Second thing, here's where we are also systemically, the bigger picture. We live in a country where overt racism can't explain some of the biggest problems that we have. Systemic racism can, not interpersonal, systemic. So right now, for instance, the typical white family in this country has between 12 and 15 times the net worth of the typical black family, about 8 to 10 times that of the typical Latinx family. It's not because we worked harder. It's not because we prayed harder. It's not because we possess some superior investment wisdom that black and brown folks somehow lack. I mean, white folks tanked Wall Street and damn near destroyed the economy during the Depression of 2008 and 2009. There weren't any black folks in those investment banks doing that. That wasn't black and brown people that stole 20% of the collective net worth of the country or lost it over the course of 18 months, $12.5 trillion. Squandered, wasted, lost, or stolen. That was just like the richest, smartest white boys with MBAs from the finest institutions, and they damn near took us all down. So it's not because we're smarter that we have 12 times as much net worth, 15 times as much net worth. It's because we live in a history of plunder where some folks had access to resources and other folks did not, and then that gets passed down generation after generation. That's how we know it is systemic. Inertia, which they taught y'all about in what, like third grade, right? Newton's first law of motion. An object in motion tends to remain in motion, right? Newton's first law, the notion of inertia, that's not just a physical property. That's not just a property of the physical universe. It's a property of the socioeconomic, the political, the cultural universe. That which happens in one generation affects the next and the next and the next and the next and on down the line until we intervene and stop it. And we still haven't done it. We pass laws to supposedly stop the bleeding from continuing, but we don't go and repair the wound that we created in the first place. Right? And so that's a systemic issue. The fact that right now, African-American folks with college degrees almost twice as likely as white folks with degrees to be unemployed. Doesn't matter what you majored in either, by the way. Any major, twice as likely for black folks to be out of work as it is for white folks with the same degree. For Latinx folks, about 50% more likely than whites with a comparable degree to be out of work. Asian American folks, about 25% more likely to be unemployed even with the same degree. Our indigenous folks, brothers and sisters, about 2/3 more likely to be unemployed even with a comparable degree relative to white folks. That's a systemic problem. You can't point to an individual racist or even a handful of them to explain that kind of systemic inequality, right? Which means we can't just fix the relations end of this to deal with that problem. Other inequalities in education and housing, criminal justice, generation in and generation out continue. The question for us today is why? Well, there are only two possible ways of understanding and answering that question. The first is that in spite of all our good intentions, which, by the way, I actually do believe most people have good intentions. I actually do believe, in spite of how much some people think I am cynical, I am not. I'm the father of a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old. I have a vested interest in believing that most folks are good, because if they weren't, I wouldn't want to send my children out in the world to try to make their way. So I think most people are good folks. I think most people want to do right by other people. I think most folks don't wake up wanting to hurt other people, but I also know we find ourselves caught in bad systems. And when good people find themselves caught in bad systems, the outcomes can still be foul, right? And so either you have to assume that these foul outcomes are the result of supreme incompetence, right? Just in spite of our good intentions, we're just so stupid that we just can't figure out 400 years on how to create real equity. That we just can't quite, we keep tinkering and spending money and doing trainings and all this, and gosh, we just can't quite figure it out. What's wrong with us? Why do we keep failing? Why is this system so broken? That's theory number one. Or theory number two is the system is not broken at all, right? And the reason we aren't getting to equity is because this society was never set up for the purpose of equity. See, and if you're waiting at the end of a conveyor belt in a sausage factory, don't be surprised when it gives you sausage. If you're waiting at the end of that conveyor belt in a sausage factory and you're like, hey man, where are my chicken nuggets? You clearly did not read the sign on the outside of the factory that told you exactly what it was going to produce. And in this society, it's like we're standing at the end of the conveyor belt marked racial injustice, which has been embedded for 400 years, and we're wondering where justice is. Y'all, that's not what the factory was built for. Inequality is not accidental. Inequality is not incidental. Inequality was the point. It's not a glitch. Like today, I woke up, I checked my phone. You know how we all do this, right? Because we're all just sort of, wedded to our technology. I got on my phone. I had like 15 app updates in the App Store, right? And then you go to these updates, and it's usually nothing big, right? It just says, we've got some fixes for some bugs. It's a bug fix, a glitch fix. You just download this patch, and it'll all be good, right? Inequality is not like that. Inequality is not a glitch in the app known as America. Inequality is a feature. It was programmed in from the beginning. And some people hear me say that, and they get very upset, and they say, well, Tim, that seems horribly un-American. You're bashing America. No, man, I'm just reading history books. That's all. I just read what the people said who set the thing up. I just take them at their word. Look, Thomas Jefferson said, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But now here's the deal. When he wrote those pretty words, he owned a couple hundred human beings at the time, and I don't think that he had forgotten where his bank account came from. I don't think that when he wrote those words, it was because he just didn't remember that he owned other human beings whom he viewed as inferior to him. When he wrote those words, he did not intend to include them. It was not an accident. It was not an oversight. It was not a glitch. It was not a mistake. When Thomas Jefferson said all men, he did not mean all. He didn't mean black and brown folks. He didn't mean propertyless white folks for that matter, and he certainly didn't mean women. So that racism, classism, sexism, all these things were there at the inception. They are not oversights, right? Very important for us to understand that. How do you undo a problem if you don't acknowledge how deeply embedded, if it's baked into the recipe, you know, it's like you make gumbo or something. I lived in New Orleans for 10 years, you know. And when you make gumbo, once it's made, you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to take that ingredient out of the gumbo. No, it's in there. It's part of the recipe. If you don't like the way it tastes, you have to start making your gumbo very differently. Right? You have to change the recipe entirely, because the recipe that Thomas Jefferson gave us was this recipe that said all men, but yeah, not really, right? Which is another reason we can't say all lives matter, because Thomas Jefferson said it. He clearly didn't mean it, right? We all heard the national anthem, right, earlier, but there's also the Pledge of Allegiance, right, which at the very end says what? Liberty and justice for all, right? That's another thing. And other people wrote that in the 1880s. Then they rewrote it in the 1920s, and they rewrote it in the 1950s. There's those pretty words again, all, right? But the people who wrote those things didn't mean those things. So we can't say all until all really includes all, and it never has, and it wasn't supposed to. If we can't be honest about that history, we're going to keep flailing, and we're going to be doing this 400 years on if we still have a country. Right? This was embedded in the very inception of the country. And we see that most clearly in the area of policing and law enforcement. Let us be very, very, very clear. And let us be clear the way that black and brown folks have to be clear, because this is their lived reality. Law enforcement was never, at any point in the history of this country, intended for the protection of black people. It was never intended for the protection of poor people of any color. It was quite the opposite. The earliest iterations of law enforcement were indeed slave patrols, that is to say, people whose job was to control black bodies for the benefit of white landowners. That is to say, to protect the haves from the have-nots, paying no attention to why the haves had and why the had-nots didn't have, right? That was the origin of law enforcement. That doesn't mean that every single person who has ever served in a law enforcement capacity is an overt white supremacist, but let us understand the institution was created for that purpose. Who was it, after all, that enforced the slave codes? Who was it that enforced the black codes after enslavement ended? Who was it that enforced convict lease laws? Who was it that collaborated with the mobs in lynchings throughout the 19th and early 20th and mid-20th century? Who was it that pulled those sit-in protesters off the stools throughout the South in the 1960s and hosed down protesters with water cannons and beat them on the bridge in Selma? Who was it that enforced the war on drugs and continue to this day to do so? In every iteration, those were police. That is the black and brown experience of law enforcement. And if people in law enforcement don't know that history, and they certainly don't have to in order to get a badge and a gun and the authority of the state, if they don't know that history, and if they don't feel that they have to be accountable to that history, they cannot do justice by the communities that they claim to serve. And the people in the community know it. The institution was busted from the beginning in terms of its relationship to black and brown folks, but it functions exactly as it was intended in the eyes of white folks and always has. Law enforcement as an institution was established for that purpose. It was not the institution that came and got your cat out of the tree. It was not the institution that came and gave little Johnny a ride around with the siren going to show him how gosh darn exciting it was to be a policeman. It was not Andy Griffith, right? It was not Dragnet. It was not, well, maybe it was Dragnet, but it was being on the other side of Dragnet. That's the history of law enforcement. It doesn't mean that a person can't go into law enforcement with the really best intentions. I've known plenty of people who did. I also know that you can go into that institution with the best of intentions, but if that institution does not want to change, and history says it generally does not, it will probably break you before you break it. And I've known plenty of people who got run out of policing precisely because they stood up and said something about brutality, said something about corruption, said something about racism in the ranks, and then they were labeled the rat and their careers were ended. We talk a lot about, no snitching on the streets, but the worst when it comes to not snitching are the people in uniform with the guns and the badges who definitely don't want to tell on their partners when they do things that violate the Constitution of the United States. See, Black and brown folks understand that history. And if you want to be a responsible member of law enforcement, you must know that history. We wonder why Black and brown folks don't trust police. History gives them literally no reason to do so, right? And so if we want to change that, you can't just tell Black folks, respect authority. You can't just tell Black folks, do what you're told when you're told, comply, right? You have to understand that when you do that, you're asking Black folks to adopt cultural amnesia as a religious sacrament, right? You're asking Black folks to act like history didn't happen. History happened and it left scars. And if you want to be a responsible law enforcement official, for that matter, if you want to be a responsible teacher, because these dynamics exist in schools as well, you have to be responsible and responsive to that. But it's even deeper than that. It's not just police. It's not just teachers. It's not just the labor market. It's the ideology of our country that embeds this problem. What do I mean by that? Well, I want you to think about, despite all of our differences, and you heard in some of the introductory remarks, we come from a lot of different backgrounds. We're a very diverse bunch of people here, several hundred folks gathered for this event today. Some of us, like me, are not even from Tallahassee or from the state of Florida. There are folks from all over the country who are joining in. We come from all kinds of different backgrounds, but there is one thing that I know for a fact we all have in common, that we were all taught, right? Regardless of your geographic location, your racial background, cultural, ethnic, economic, any of that. The one thing that we were all taught in common, either by family or by teachers or by preachers or by the media and politicians, or maybe we just soaked it up because it's all around us, because it's the sort of cornerstone of American thinking, the cornerstone of American ideology, the secular gospel, right? Like if America was a Bible, this would be Genesis 1:1, right? It's that notion that, well, in America, anybody can make it, if they just try hard. Like you can be anything you want to be if you just work for it, right? And wherever you end up is all about you and your own effort. It's that notion of meritocracy, that notion of rugged individualism, right? The idea that you're the captain of your own ship and wherever you end up is sort of all about you. Think about it for a minute. First of all, let's reflect on the fact that we used to say that. We said that even during segregation, right? So, I mean, come on, y'all. Like it was a fraud from the beginning, right? We said that. That was our ideology even during a period of formal apartheid in this country. So we clearly didn't mean it. It was just something we said. We said that at a time when women couldn't vote. We said that at a time when children were still working in factories and mines. I mean, that has been our ideology from the beginning. So come on. I mean, it's just rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything. But we like to take it seriously, and so we say it. Now, what happens if I tell you that wherever you end up is all about you, and wherever they end up is all about them, and wherever anyone ends up is all about their own effort, and anybody can make it, but then that person to whom I tell that looks around and sees the inequality that they can witness with their own eyes. They don't have to have a PhD, anthropology degree, sociology degree. They just have to have the ability to pay attention. They just have to be awake. Right? And that child, it could be a child, looks around and sees disproportionately white folks on top of the various structures, Black and brown folks below them. Men disproportionately on the top of the structures, women below them. Wealthy and affluent folks on the top of the structures, working class and lower income folks beneath them. Right? Straight and cisgendered folk on the top, LGBTQ folk beneath them. When you see these structures of disparity and you were told wherever you end up is on you, what do you think people conclude? Right? What becomes the logical conclusion for someone, unless they are thinking critically, unless they were given a sociological imagination, which, unless I miss something, they don't teach that in elementary school, middle school, most high schools. Even most college students don't learn that, and most folks don't learn it at home. So if I've been told wherever I end up is all about me, wherever you end up is all about you, and then I see some here and some here, I start to think, well, maybe these people at the top are just better, y'all. Maybe these people at the bottom are there because they just have the wrong values. They made bad choices, right? Maybe they even have bad biology and genetics. Now we start rationalizing. Now we start justifying the disparities because the secular gospel of America demands that we do that. The secular gospel of our country encourages the rationalization and justification of the inequities that we see. How in the world are you ever going to address those inequities unless you challenge that ideology? And let's be honest, challenging that ideology is very difficult, isn't it? Because to challenge that ideology, I mean, it's sort of like going to church, right, on a Sunday, and after the preacher's done with the sermon, standing up in the third row of pews and raising your hand and being like, oh, that was lovely, but y'all do know there is no God, right? So really, why are we here? Right? Generally does not go over particularly well with the congregated in the church, right? Because they came to hear the sermon. Now you just blew up their whole thing. Same thing when we say that maybe this notion of rugged individualism isn't what it's cracked up to be, that in fact there are systemic obstacles that have historically ensured that that wasn't a real thing, that it was just this empty rhetoric, right? But we have a hard time accepting that because we really want to believe that our accomplishments are ours. That's why everybody says, I came from nothing. I'm a self-made. Ain't nobody self-made. Did you have family, right? Did somebody feed you, or were you raised on an island by a porpoise? Because the last time I checked, none of us were. The last time I checked, we all had people. The last time I checked, we all had help. We all had teachers. We all had mentors, without which we wouldn't even be able to speak the language, let alone become rich, become powerful, hold a job, have a family, right? We all had help. But we're so embedded in this ridiculous notion of individualism that we miss the importance of the collective. We miss the importance of working together to overcome systemic and institutional obstacles that are preventing some individuals from living up to the things that they can be. I'm not saying that hard work isn't important. Like I said, I have a 19 and a 17-year-old child, both of them daughters. Make no mistake, we are very clear as parents that they can do whatever they want to do in life, and we will support them and they can succeed. But we're also very clear and have been clear with them from the beginning that as women, they will experience folks, both men and sadly some women, who believe they are lesser because of that. And as a result, they will have to not just work hard as individual carbon-based life forms, but they will have to work collectively with others to deal with the structures of patriarchy, sexism, misogyny, rape culture, all of these things that women so disproportionately experience in our culture and in our society. That's how a person can truly be all that they were meant to be. But if we don't deal with the systemic piece, then we leave people with only one explanation for their own shortcomings. Well, it must be me, right? And so then when people are struggling, it isn't just that the successful internalize their superiority and think to themselves, well, look at all that I accomplished, right? As if they didn't have any help. But it means that the people who are suffering, the people who are not succeeding at the same level, the people who are unemployed, the people who are poor, the people who have health issues, the people that didn't finish school or weren't even able to afford school, now they start to think that there's something wrong with them, right? And they internalize that oppression. They internalize that self-hatred, right? That's why when you look at those tests for subconscious bias that everybody's so high on, it isn't just white folks that have internalized subconscious bias against black folks. The data says that like half of black folks have internalized that subconscious anti-black bias against themselves. Right, but what did Malcolm X say? Who has it taught you to hate yourself? Who taught you to hate your nose and your lips and your skin, right? Wasn't black people that taught black people to hate themselves. That was something that came from the larger structure and functioning of this society. And so if we want to heal the personal piece that we talk about sometimes, we still got to deal with the systemic piece. So what is required now? What is required for you all? What is required for my community here in Nashville? What is required for us as a country? Well, first, let me say what is not required. What we do not need, at least not in isolation, and what we cannot rely on is more training, right? Whether that's diversity training for corporations or implicit bias training for police. That isn't going to do it because this bias is not implicit. This is explicit and it is embedded in the structures of the society. We need systemic racism training, right? not implicit individual racism training. What we also do not need is to rely on body cams for law enforcement to somehow catch wrongdoing. It will not suffice. Although, let me say, if you are going to kill Tony McDade and conveniently forget to turn your body camera on, it would help if maybe you did a little bit better in that regard. But in general, it isn't going to suffice. It isn't going to suffice to have a little more money over here or a little more money over there for this program or that program. We have to fundamentally think about transforming the institutions themselves and the way that we think about them. What we don't need is law enforcement responding to mental health emergencies for which they are not trained. What we don't need is more of that. What we need is communities having the capacity to decide who is going to police their community and enforce public safety and how they're going to do it. Now, I happen to believe that in the long run, we have to devolve a vast majority of the things that we ask police and law enforcement to do to other folks who are frankly more equipped and better at doing it. I believe in that way we have to depolice much of our society. But on the path from point A to point B, at the very least, can we at least agree that we need communities to be involved integrally in the choosing of who is going to police their streets and who is going to enforce the laws in their community? Can we not at least agree that it would be helpful to say, hey, if you want to be a law enforcement official, particularly in a black community, especially given the history and the fraught relationship between police and the people that they quote unquote police and quote unquote protect and serve, can't we at least say that if you want to police there, you ought to have to spend, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, the first 3 or 4 months in like a probationary period where you don't have a gun, you don't have the arrest power, but you're on the payroll and you go and you spend that 3 or 4 months knocking on doors, meeting with people at the barbershop, at the coffee shop, at the church, at the mosque, on their front porch, on the corner, talking to them, getting to know them, asking them questions, telling them about yourself. They tell you about them. You get to know the community. And then at the end of that 4 months, the community takes a vote on whether or not you get to be an officer in that community, because they've had a chance to size you up. They've had a chance to actually determine, are you coming in there like an enforcer, an occupier who looks down on the community, or are you really there for the people, right? And if you come in with the proper humility, they'll probably say, yeah, you know, that one's all right. But if you come in with the attitude that says, I'm a warrior, which is what we teach police in this country to do. We teach them, we send them to things called warrior trainings, and then we equip them with decommissioned military equipment and camouflage. Why in the hell does an American police officer need camouflage on the streets of America? Camouflage was created either for the deserts of the so-called Middle East or the jungles of Vietnam. What the hell does that have to do with Tallahassee? What does that have to do with Ferguson? What does it have to do with Chicago? What does it have to do with Baltimore? Why in the world do we need folks in military gear unless we are trying to convince them and train them to see the people that they supposedly protect as the enemy, like they're in Fallujah, right? See, we have to rethink the way that we do the institution. It isn't enough to just train people when you're equipping them with the warrior mentality and warrior mindset. The same is true with teachers. We have to have the community involved in picking who's going to teach their children. We can't just have teachers get, 5 weeks of training with Teach for America, and then we cut them loose in a community they know nothing about. Right? Just because they went to Princeton and they got a really good degree, or they're real smart, they had good test scores, and now they're working for TFA. They got 5 weeks of training, not site specific, by the way, not history or context specific, just 5 weeks of training. Now you dump them in a place, they don't know anything about the folks there. Right? Why? At some level, we're sending a message that we don't really prioritize the education of the people in that community, because if we did, we would let them pick who's going to educate and work with their children. Same thing with police. Right? We have to talk about self-determination and autonomy, empowering the people in the community to make their own decisions. What we need, above all else, perhaps, is something akin to what we've seen other countries do. Countries far braver than ours. Now, I'm not saying they've done it exactly right. I'm not saying that they have it all together and there are growing pains associated with it, but we have seen South Africa, we have seen Rwanda, we have seen folks in Northern Ireland. We saw folks in Germany after World War II take far more responsibility and accountability for their crimes than we've ever taken for ours as a society. And yet we look down on these places and we say, well, we're the greatest nation ever struck off from the forehead of God Almighty. But if that's the case, why can't we do truth and reconciliation? Scratch that. I don't even like the term reconciliation. Why can't we do truth and justice? The reason I don't like the term reconciliation is, for me, it's, you know, sort of hard to reconcile something which was never conciled in the first place. But I like truth. That part of it's really important, right? We need truth at the local level, at the national level. We need to be able to talk about the history of our local communities. How did we get where we are? Like, I'm here in Nashville. I'm coming to you from a place that was Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw land, and I'm speaking to you in a home that's about 25 minutes drive from Andrew Jackson's Hermitage, where indigenous removal was crafted, and those folks were pushed off the land. That matters. This is land that was worked for hundreds of years by black folks who couldn't even own their own name, let alone the property where I sit. That's truth. And we have to be honest about that. None of us come here with clean hands, right? None of us come here innocent. We are all embedded in this system of iniquity and inequity, and we have to own that, not so that we will feel guilty about it. We're not to blame for it, but we inherit the legacy of all that has come before. There's a difference, right, between guilt and responsibility. Guilt is what you feel for the stuff you've actually done, right? And responsibility is something that you take because of the kind of human being that you are. Truth and justice processes, which can be done locally, they can be done institutionally at a school or a particular workplace or within a law enforcement capacity. It can be done nationwide, the way it's been done in South Africa, for instance, the way it was done in Rwanda. All of that is important, because if we don't tell the truth about how we got here, or if we try to shut down the truth, if we say, for instance, well, we can't have critical race theory taught in trainings around the country, and we're going to ban that, which is what the administration is saying, or if they say, oh, well, you know, we can't have the 1619 Project from the New York Times because that besmirches the history of America. You know, we can't do that. No, it tells the truth about the history of America. And some folks are very much wedded to the lie, right? They want a very sanitized history. They want us to remember, you know, George Washington as the guy that chopped down the cherry tree, but he told his daddy because he's just so gosh darn honest, right? Little Georgie couldn't tell a lie. Well, apparently the historians could, because that story didn't even happen. Right? George Washington didn't chop down any damn cherry tree and then go tell his father. That was a made-up, concocted story. Here's one that isn't made up. George Washington was such a vicious and depraved slave owner that when one particular woman ran away from his plantation, he had her hunted down viciously, right, offering bounties on her head to catch her. That actually happened. But who knows which story? I would say far more Americans grow up knowing the cherry tree story than the depraved slave owner story, because we don't want to besmirch the history of America. No, what we want, if we really love this country, if we really care about its founding documents, if we actually want Thomas Jefferson's pretty words to be true, we have to tell the truth. And we have to act on the basis of that truth. It's those of us who are willing to stare truth in the face who love this country, not the ones who lie and cover it up in the name of some phony rah-rah patriotism. You will never have justice unless we have truth. So let me share some truth today. Not that I haven't been already, but I'm going to share a little bit more, and then I'm going to take some questions. We will never have justice. You will never have justice so long as there are laws on the books in your states, in your state in particular, that protect the identity of police involved in shootings by classifying them as victims, so that we cannot find out who the perpetrators are unless there are charges brought or unless the police decide to release that name. We will never have justice as long as police departments are allowed to justify dragging citizens out of their cars to the ground for not complying with commands, even when those citizens pose no threat to anybody and are taking part in an otherwise peaceful protest, and then criminalize those who come to that person's defense, all of whose criminalization should be ended today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, today, by dropping the charges against all of the Tally 19 immediately, as an act of good faith, as an act of truth, as an act of reconciliation, if you prefer that term, but certainly as an act of justice, so that we can begin to move forward and, quote unquote, heal. We can never have justice as long as police unions rarely, if ever, will find fault with the actions of their members, no matter how depraved, and will defend them no matter what they do in the name of their contracts. We will never have peace. We will never have justice as long as We continue to have involvement in those same forces in the Race Relations Summit, despite their treatment of Black Lives Matter protesters, the killing of Michael Johnson, the killing of Tony McDade, the killing of Wilburn Woodward, right? And when your department employs officers who shoot suspects in the back of the head after announcing to them that they are going to kill them and then conveniently forget to activate their body cameras, then we have a problem. And that too must be said. And I know, there will be some who have been upset the whole time I've been talking, other than that part about how I'm 52 and don't know how to run technology. That might have been the last time some folks were happy. Can't help you, right? I know there will be some folks who say, but Tim, you're being so hard on the police. My God, my God, my God. They have a hard job. It's very dangerous. I know that. I also know that it's a voluntary job. Right? It's a voluntary job. Being Black in America, not a voluntary job. It is harder. And it is more dangerous, and it is not voluntary. And most importantly, Black folks don't get to retire with their pension intact when they do something foul to somebody else. That's the difference. That's the difference. That's the difference. And we have to be prepared to say that, no matter how many feathers get ruffled, no matter how many people get upset, because truth is more important than somebody's feelings about the truth. Honesty is more important, and it's important for people to take that first step. It doesn't matter whether you believe that a particular police action might have been justifiable under the terms of the law. You have to be aware of the pain and the grief in the communities affected by that. Y'all's mayor even said that, right? I mean, even after certain charges were not brought and the grand jury found no reason to indict, right, there was still that realization that we can't just let it sit there, right? You still have to deal with the pain. You still have to sit with the pain. You can't just say, can't we just all come together in a spirit of unity, as long as that pain is there, and that pain is connected to a history, and it's a history about which everybody in the community has to be accountable. You inherit the legacy of it, and we love to inherit the legacy of the good stuff, don't we? Nobody's ever turned down like a monetary inheritance from a dead relative, right? Nobody ever, like, your grandfather dies and like, here's $1 million. Nobody ever says, oh, I don't think I'll take that, because, you know, I didn't earn that, so I can't be rewarded for something I didn't earn. Oh, no, hell no. We're going to take the $1 million, right? We take the stuff that's good. We love that. That's what July 4th is, Independence Day celebration, setting off fireworks, wearing red, white, and blue, eating apple pie in commemoration of some stuff that happened a really long-ass time ago, y'all, but we keep talking about it every year. We love the part that makes us feel good. We just don't want to deal with the part that makes us feel bad or brings us up a little short or calls into question what our commitments are. Like I said, I think most folks are good people. I really do. And by the way, that includes most teachers. That includes most cops. That includes most employers. It includes most bankers. It includes most everybody. I think most people are good people. But I'm telling you, good people caught up in bad systems are more likely to be changed by the system than they are to change the system. Those on the outside looking in, challenging those systems, are the ones to whom we need to turn right now. They're the ones to whom we need to listen. The people in your community, these brave and courageous soldiers for justice, fighting every day and then being arrested for that and being charged for that and being ignored and silenced in this moment. They are the ones to whom we need to be listening. You know, when I worked in public housing communities in New Orleans as a community organizer for about 15 months in the 90s, and I spent my days with people whose, you know, probably average educational attainment was high school diploma, maybe less. Very few had gone to college. All of them poor, overwhelmingly Black and brown folks, right? But I learned more from those folks, those disempowered, silenced, marginalized people, about the way that this society works than I ever learned from anybody with a PhD behind their name. And that's not meant as a criticism of my professors. They were wonderful. They were brilliant. They were scholars. They taught me a lot. But what it says is that there's wisdom in unseen places, that there's insight in the communities that we ignore, that there are organic intellectuals who know more about this society and about the communities where we live than people who have written all those books. You know, I apologize for that obnoxiously long bio at the beginning, in part because I'm self-conscious enough to realize that none of that matters. The only thing that really matters is that I got taught by the right people. I got taught by Black and brown folks who were patient enough with me to teach me and to give me the insights and the wisdom that I now share with other people. And I implore everyone who is able to hear my voice today, to be prepared to not only receive that wisdom, but then to act on that wisdom, to hear and to listen and to open yourself up to it, to take advantage of this pandemic moment, which has in fact provided us with a unique opportunity, right? A unique opportunity to hear and to see and to feel, right? Because think about it. I mean, pre-pandemic, we're all going about our lives, right? You got the background noise of everyday life. It makes it hard to focus. Because that thing that happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, I mean, 8 minutes and 46 seconds of Derek Chauvin's knee grinding into his neck. Yeah, that was maybe an extreme 8-minute, 46-second version of the film, but we've seen that movie before, right? Eric Garner was choked out on the streets of Staten Island. We didn't see this level of outrage, especially from white America. Tamir Rice was shot and killed in a park in Cleveland, 12 years old, playing with a toy gun on film. We didn't see this level of outrage and anger from white America. Black and brown folks were on it, but white folks were hitting the snooze button. John Crawford killed in a Walmart in Beaver Creek right outside of Dayton, Ohio. Same thing on film. Didn't lead to this level of uprising. Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Laquan McDonald in Chicago. Right? The aftermath of the killing of Philando Castile, also in the Twin Cities, his killer acquitted of all wrongdoing. That didn't lead to this level of uprising. Why is now different? Now is different because of the pandemic moment. Because we're in this sort of virtual lockdown space where we have some quiet relative to our normal time. Do not squander that. It's bad enough that 225,000 people have died and we can't redeem them, we can't bring them back. But what we can do is ensure that in the midst of this tragedy, we focus not only on behalf of black and brown folks who have been asking white America to focus for a very long time and to get up out of bed and to stop hitting the snooze button, but that we focus for the sake of our families and our children too, because our democracy is at stake, our country is at stake. White folks are dying too, maybe not as much. We're the collateral damage of this nonsense, but we're being damaged nonetheless. Right, we got white folks dying in an opioid crisis. Why? Because for 40 years, white America treated drugs like a crime problem and a morality problem rather than a health problem, because it was just black and brown folks getting locked up. So what the hell? We don't need rehab. We don't need treatment. We just need a lot of prison cells. And now these same white folks in these small towns all across America are like, where's the rehab? Because my little cousin Jimmy John over here doesn't have any treatment. Why don't we have treatment? We don't have treatment, fool, because for 40 years you voted for politicians that promised to lock people up for slinging dime bags on the corner. That's why. Right? See, everything comes back to haunt you in the end. Everything comes back to destroy the society upon which we all depend. This isn't about saviorism. It's not about charity. This isn't about what we need to do for black and brown folks. This is what we need to do for the country that we claim to love. If you love it like you claim to love it, then we got to do the work. And we have to be prepared to listen to the folks who've been doing the work for 400 years. Thank you all so very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. I got about 20 minutes left, and I'm going to spend those taking questions that I suppose will be monitored and filtered out or whatever. Not filtered out, but filtered by people who are running this, so I don't have to scroll through, I hope. But anyway, thank you all so very much. It's been a pleasure and honor. I hope you feel the same, but I can't help you if not. It has been worth it, I hope. And I hope the rest of your day goes very well. Look forward to seeing some of y'all in the workshop that I'll be doing in a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tim. At this time, we do have some questions, and I will ask Mary Knight if you will please read the first question that we have.
The first question is, what are 3 things we can do as a community to eliminate the isms you spoke about today?
Well, I think the first is to go down this truth and reconciliation or truth and justice model process. There have been obviously countries that have done it, as I mentioned. There have also been some communities that have tried to do versions of this here in the United States. Omaha, Nebraska has done some stuff around this in response to a lynching that took place there 100 years ago, I think last year, now 101 years ago. Tulsa has done some of that with regard to the bombing of the Greenwood district. Detroit actually tried to start this process. I'm not sure how far along it got, but there have been some real attempts to do that, to sort of excavate the history of the community. And y'all know Tallahassee's history far better, than I do. I only know it maybe secondhand, but there are so many people in the community who are able to provide that history, that lived experience. So I think convening some type of initiatory process where people can come together and talk about what their experiences have been, good, bad, and ugly, would be a really important place to start, because before we can repair the damage, we have to make sure people understand the damage. And the problem is right now we live in a society where I honestly believe we have structured ignorance so deliberately. We have kept people naive about things for so long that they come by that ignorance very honestly. I mean, I think there are an awful lot, particularly young folks, right, who have no connection to the history. And even when we talk about the civil rights history of just 50, 60 years ago, you know, if you show a 17-year-old like my youngest daughter a black and white film footage from 1963 in Birmingham or 1965 in Selma, I mean, that might as well be stone tablets to a 17-year-old, right? Like, they don't have any they don't remember black and white televisions, for God's sake, right? So to them, it's like, God, that looks so ancient, right? Even though for those of us, you know, who are a little older, we know it's not. So I think we've got to really bring this history into the present and not let it sort of sit in the stale textbooks or old footage, but really bring these folks into the present day to talk about the continuity piece. So that's number one. The second thing, I think, is that we really have to engage the activist community in setting the agenda for these things. That doesn't mean that they're always going to get it right. In fact, those of us who have done activist work know that we often get it wrong. By the way, there were times that the civil rights movement, which we never ever think about its failures or its mistakes, right? We sort of learn about its victories, that we go from one epic event to the other and they were all successful. That's not actually what happened. You know, Dr. King and his associates made all kinds of mistakes. People in SNCC made all kinds of mistakes, had campaigns that didn't work, had efforts that failed, strategies that weren't effective. So we have to let people fail on the road to justice. We have to let people make mistakes, but most importantly, it's making sure that the people who are most impacted by whatever mistakes are made, whether they make them or somebody else make them, they need to be the ones running the ship, you know, or steering the ship. So making sure that we don't just sort of look to the typical leaders, right? The civic leaders, the corporate leaders, the business community, the political leadership, the major like foundations and things like that, but actually looking to the grassroots, looking to those folks who live this every day and ensuring that they are not only at the table, but that they are running the conversation. Right? Are they going to say things that are going to rub some folks the wrong way? Of course. Are they going to make some tactical and strategic errors from time to time? Of course. But so are we, right? So are we, the established. We're going to screw up as well. The question is, when we screw up, who's most affected? And if these are the folks over here who are most affected, at least give them the opportunity to make their own mistakes, right? Because they're going to pay the price one way or the other. At least that way they'll have some sense of empowerment. And then the final thing that I think is important is for every individual within the community to do their own sort of critical assessment of their own positionality in this conversation. What do I mean by that? I mean, I think that the only way that we can really show up as allies in this work, white folks to black and brown folks, men to women, straight and cisgendered folk to LGBTQ folk, affluent folk to poor folk and working class folk, the only way that you can show up as an ally to somebody else is if you're very clear about the way that these identities have shaped your own experience, right? So how has whiteness shaped you? How has, if you're white, how has being black or brown shaped you? And I think most black and brown folks sort of know, but it's still helpful to be clear, right? How has being a man shaped you? How has being a woman shaped you? How has being gender fluid in between these shaped you? How has being LGBTQ shaped you? How has being straight and cisgendered shaped you? Being poor, being rich? What are the experiences that you've had, able-bodied versus disabled, all these things that have shaped your experience? The circles in which you run, the neighborhood in which you live, the schools that you attended or that your parents attended. All of these things, when we ask these questions and when we take inventory of our lives, we discover some things about ourselves. And one of the things that we discover is that identity matters and that it matters in a very intersectional way, so that I might have privilege in one area but be marginalized in another, a very important insight. And when I do my workshop in a little bit here, I'm going to talk about that yeah, there's privilege in one area, let's say whiteness, but then there might be marginality as someone who's LGBTQ, or someone who is a white woman could still be marginalized by patriarchy. Someone who is disabled could still be marginalized by ableism. We have to deal with both sides of that ledger, both the up and the down, and we have to be accountable for our up. A lot of times we don't, right? We just want to talk about where we got hurt, which would have been real easy for me. Like, I'm Jewish. I grew up in Nashville, where there's like 3 churches on every corner, and like the 4th corner is a Walgreens or something. So I was one of like 5,000 Jews, and I had teachers regularly that would just pop in the classroom to tell me that I was going to go to hell. Like, and this is a public school in the 70s and 80s, right? And they would tell me that, and that was horrific. And I deserved the solidarity of my progressive Christian friends to stand up against that. But they also deserved, especially when they were black folks, they deserved my solidarity around the marginality they were experiencing and accountability from me with regard to the privilege as a white person that I was receiving. Both of those things were true, right? Solidarity is a multi-directional highway, and the only way we get there to the ultimate destination on that highway is by being very clear about how our identities, plural, have shaped us for good and for bad. So I would say those are the 3 things that I would recommend.
Thank you. The second question is, how do we keep white folks woke?
Well, I think, look, I start with the assumption that we have 400 years of white folks now called white. They weren't called white 400 years ago. That actually was a mid 17th century contrivance. But 400 years approximately of people we now call white, mostly sleeping on this thing, mostly hitting the snooze button, right? That's the normal default. Like, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying, like, yeah, there have always been white folks involved in the struggle for justice. There were lots of white folks who were abolitionists, not enough, but there were some. There were certainly white folks involved in the civil rights struggle. There are white folks involved in anti-racist work now, obviously. I'm one of them. I'm looking right at it. But here's the thing. That is not the norm. In the 1960s, at a time when, you look back now, sort of wistfully at it, and we go, oh, what a great time that was. Isn't that amazing? And even white folks are like, oh, Dr. King is like a secular saint. But let's be clear, like, when that stuff was actually going on, the overwhelming majority of white people in poll after poll after poll, without exception, said they saw no reason for any of it. They didn't understand the need for these protests. They thought the protests were going to cause more trouble than they were going to solve. They didn't think black people were even treated unequally. In the polls that were taken in 62 and 63, before the civil rights laws were even passed, most white folks, between 2/3 and 85%, depending on the poll and the question, said that black people were already treated equally. So I sort of start with the assumption most white folks are not going to get it. But here's the good news. Most white folks don't have to get it. It doesn't have to be 50% plus one. We just need enough. I don't know what enough is. It's somewhere between what we got now and 50% plus one. Somewhere in there is the sweet spot for allyship and solidarity, right? And if we can get enough white folks following the leadership and the direction of black and brown folks, then I think we stand a chance to keep people engaged in the work. But I think we just have to acknowledge that this work is not about trying to make most white people solidarity fighters. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think most men are ever going to turn on patriarchy. I don't think most rich folks are going to really want to upend the class system. I don't think, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't expect that. But I think that some will, and here's what I think will make more rather than less. I don't think it will happen because of guilt and shame. So we need to stop woke scolding people who just aren't quite there yet. We do a lot of that within the movement, right? Unfortunately, where it's like, well, now you're upset about racism, but where were you when blah, blah, blah? And why haven't you? Look, we don't have time for that. I understand the impulse, right? I mentioned some of those previous police killings before George Floyd. And yeah, I mentioned that it didn't lead to an uprising, but I wasn't trying to shame people for not joining. Look, I don't care when you come to the party, as long as you come and you're ready to actually do whatever the party organizer needs for you to do. Right? It doesn't matter. I can't get on you for only joining the movement on Friday when I might have just joined it on Monday, metaphorically speaking, right? So we don't need to scold people for not knowing what we know, because the only reason we know some stuff is that we had people who taught us, and we're lucky for that. We didn't earn it, right? We got lucky. We had mentors. We had teachers. We had folks that opened our eyes. We need to be that for other people. So guilt and shame won't work. I'll tell you what else won't work is rage. You can't build a just society just on the basis of outrage. So if all these white folks flood the movement and they're just outraged, I'm so angry at injustice, cool, but you can't burn on that high flame forever. You can't. Black and brown folks know that. Black and brown folks are angry, been angry about this for 400 years, but they can't burn on a high flame all the time. It will consume them, right? When you have a bonfire burning on a high heat, it consumes the fuel source. So you have to be measured and thinking about how you're going to proceed, and you have to think strategically. What I also think is important is we have to understand our stake in it. The way that we stay, I don't know if woke is the right word here, but the way that we stay in the movement long term is understanding our stake. Not trying to do this as some charitable thing to save black people. Black people will save themselves from white supremacy. I'm starting to wonder who's going to save white people from it. And here's what I mean by that. I got my start right after college. First thing I did was I worked in the campaigns against David Duke, former Klan leader, neo-Nazi white supremacist in Louisiana. In the governor's race in 1991, that man got 675,000 votes, which was 55% of all white voters. The year before, when he ran for Senate, he got 60% of the white vote. So over the course of two different campaigns, he received the unique votes of nearly 700,000 white people in Louisiana. Now, I know there are not 700,000 Nazis in the state of Louisiana, neither then nor today. There are not 700,000 Nazis, but there were 700,000 white people who were perfectly willing to vote for a guy who was, and they knew he was. They weren't in denial about it. Everybody knew. There were children in utero, not even born yet, who knew David Duke was a Nazi. It was an open secret, right? And they still voted for him, right? And I remember when the governor's race ended, realizing the only reason a Nazi didn't become a U.S. senator from Louisiana that year, the only reason that David Duke didn't become the governor the year after was because black people saved our ass. That's the truth. Black people looked up, because white folks were going to vote for him. I mean, white folks were like, yeah, Nazi, do it, go, right? And black folks were like, yeah, no, not today, right? And we still haven't thanked them for saving us, right? And we haven't acknowledged that it's not black folks' job to save us, right? It's our job. We talk about self-help with other people. We always love to help folks of color. Help yourselves, pull yourselves up. Who's going to pull ourselves up? Who's going to help us get free from this mentality that would allow 700,000 white folks, including some who are otherwise probably pretty decent, probably nice to old folks, animals, and children, right? But nonetheless could vote for a Nazi. See, that's our cross to bear, which is a weird metaphor for a Jewish kid to use, I realize, but it is, right? That's on us. We have to do that work to free ourselves, because this thing is a prison for our soul, a prison for our mentality, a prison for our bodies and our hearts as well. And I think if we lead with that kind of narrative, right, people will stay because they realize it's about them too. It's not just about helping other people. It's not charity work, it's self-help.
Thank you. The last question is, I'm a white parent of a black child. What's one of the most important things I can do to protect my child from society while living in a white household?
I think the most important thing is to relinquish any hope that colorblindness in oneself or others is feasible or desirable. What I mean by that is, and I think you're even raising the question is a good sign, because I can tell you there are plenty of white parents of black and brown children who never been asked the question. And so I applaud you for even asking it, frankly. I think it's important to understand these systemic forces that your child is going to face, and to prepare that child for those forces, not only you doing that, but also with black folks in the community who can serve as mentors and guides and teachers to help with that, because that's where that collective wisdom is. And the black community needs your child to succeed. The black community needs your child to be a strong black child and a strong black adult, and you may or may not be equipped to do that. You may be equipped to provide certain things, and by all means do those things, but you have to know that love will not be enough, not yours or the love of others, because there are these forces out there that will see your child, no matter what you do, as the embodiment of their fears and their insecurities and their anxieties. Your job is to protect that child as a parent, just like my job with my children is to protect them. I have to protect my girls from the forces of sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, rape culture. You have to protect your child from so many things, including among them the specter of white supremacy. And so seek out that knowledge when you don't have it. Have the radical humility to know where to look and where to go. And if you don't know, ask, right? And know that you have to have a color conscious approach to your child's experience? And I think you already, just by virtue of asking the question, suggest to me that you likely do. But continue with that, because and be very, very transparent about your own white experience in this society, so that your child will know that you see what they see. Because what I've heard from a lot of folks that were adopted, folks of color who were adopted, let's say, or not just adopted, it could be also a black child in a coupling where the father is one quote unquote race and the mother is a different race, for instance. So it doesn't have to be adopted, but I've known white parents raising black kids, or Latinx kids or whatever, to sort of assume that that the child will know what the parent knows without the parent making clear what the parent knows. And I think a lot of times those children grow up in those homes not realizing that they can talk to their parents about those issues, right? Because if you're a black child being raised by a white parent, you might think to yourself, well, I can't talk to mom, or I can't talk to dad, or I can't do that because they're not going to understand. Well, that makes sense for them to wonder that question. You have to signal that you're prepared to have that conversation when they're prepared to have that conversation. Because, and that's important for parents. By the way, it's also important for therapists and teachers and doctors and nurses and anyone who interacts with folks of color who's white, to be sure that you're giving off the vibe that, hey, we can have this difficult conversation. This doesn't have to be surface. We can really dig deep here. Because I think a lot of times black and brown folks will sort of clam up, and not share with us because they don't trust that we're ready to hear the truth. James Baldwin famously said that black folks will not tell white people the truth. And his reason for that was not because black folks were inveterately dishonest, right? The reason was white folks can't handle the truth that we would share with them. And so we have to, those of us who are white, we have to make it very clear how much we value this conversation and how prepared we are to be uncomfortable. That's what love looks like, particularly for white folks who are trying in a familial situation to love on black children and help raise them into healthy adults.
Thank you, Tim.
You bet.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Great comments.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you in about 15 minutes in your next workshop.
That sounds great. Thank you.
If you will all join me in thanking Tim Wise with a hand clap or an emoji. Phenomenal presentation. We said in the beginning it was going to be insightful. It was going to be innovative. It's going to be informative, and I think Tim delivered on all of that. We had several questions in our question and answer format that we did not get a chance to get to, but we will forward all of those questions to Tim, and we will send everyone who registered for this workshop a copy of his responses to those questions. Our next program begins at 10:15. And you will have several selections to choose from. We have Tim coming up, and he's going to speak on white privilege and I'm sure many other topics. We have Ms. Jane Elliott, who will be speaking on one race. We have two panels, one on healthcare, one on education. So in the next 15 minutes at 10:15, we'll begin our next session. If you will click on the link for the workshop that you registered for, and we will see you in those sessions. At this time, we're going to go on a break, and we'll see you back at 10:15. Thank you so much for joining us for the city's first virtual Race Relations Summit.